you can raise your hand during our discussion time if you have any questions. All right. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Would you mind using the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. Is that any better?
Very
Is that
nice.
on? Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just got new hearing aids and I'm.
So we actually have a really full agenda tonight, which is great. We got a lot of people who reached out wanting to present about research they're doing. We have a lot of updates we want to get to. So just to get right into it, as I said, my name is Megan. I'm the Director of External Affairs at DMR. I've been at DMR about 5 years, and I also sit on the Striped Bass Board at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission for Maine. So I'm one of your 3 commissioners. We have some new faces that have joined the DMR team. So anytime we do, I like to kind of introduce them. So if you see them or you see their email, you know who they are. So I'll start with Corinne. This is Corinne. She joined the policy team in March, I think it was.
Last day of February.
Last day of February. She actually comes to us from the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries. So we stole a fellow statesperson, but obviously great knowledge on fisheries policy and some of our more southern species. So we're really excited for Corinne. You want to say anything, Corinne? Or?
No, I'm good. No, anytime, I'm always available. If you can't get a hold of Megan, feel free to get with me. We work together, so I'm always available to chat if anybody wants to get something off their chest.
Excellent. All right. And then on the rec program team, we have Gabrielle. You want to stand up?
Yep.
Gabrielle is a new face in our rec program team. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Gabrielle Page. I've been with the DMR for less than a year and I work in the recreational fisheries program with Chris. You might run into me out in the field. I do fishery surveys. And when not doing that, I help run our volunteer angler logbook program, which I think we'll be talking about more a little bit later. Thank you.
Awesome. For those that are just coming in, just a reminder at some point for folks to sign in. It doesn't have to be if you've already sat down, just before you leave. For chairs, I see we have a lot of people. There are more chairs behind those 2 doors. I think Corinne went to go get the next stack. So feel free to grab a chair if you are coming in. Bathrooms are just, I think, down this hall. Take a, so that should be our housekeeping. So things we want to talk about today, some opportunities for stakeholder engagement, and we have a lot of research going on in the state right now about striped bass, so we'll talk about that. That will roll us into a review of our 2023 volunteer angler logbook data. We'll talk about that program, and if you want more information, there is pamphlets on the back table. I'll do a bit of a management update, really focusing on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and what's been going on there. We pulled our 2023 preliminary MRIP data. That's always really interesting to look at, so we'll go through that together. And then sometimes we get questions about temperature in striped bass or what's going on in Canada, like how is their stock doing so well? So Corinne did some research on that. She'll be presenting on that. And then really the most important part here is an open discussion. Kind of the first part is heavy on us talking, but the second half we hope is heavy on you guys talking to us about what you're seeing, what you want members to know who represent you at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, what's working, what isn't working. So we're really hoping to hear from you guys and have it be an open dialogue. So that's our game plan for today. All right, so I'm going to pinch hit here for Mass DMF. And again, this is kind of opportunities for engagement with stakeholders or research that's going on. So Mass DMF is doing a catch and release mortality study. And if anyone listened into the May board meeting, striped bass board meeting, Mike Armstrong gave a presentation on this, which was really excellent. So I recommend you go back and listen to it. But for the last year, they've been doing citizen science on discard mortality and having fishermen record things like what type of bait were they using? Was it live or dead bait? What was the water temperature? What was the handling time? And they're using all of that data to populate a model, which will support estimates of dead discards for different situations. So that's really unique. Right now, we just use 9% for everything. So really a potential for some advancement here. we're a catch and release state for the most part, so I think this has some pretty big implications for Maine. And they are looking for broader participation than just Massachusetts. So if you are interested, feel free to contact me, or there's a email, or excuse me, a webpage at the bottom, or one of those squares that you take a picture of, and we'll get you in touch with the appropriate folks at Mass DMS. All right, now we got our guts. Michelle is here. And Michelle, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Stoudinger. I'm associate faculty at the University of Maine, and I sit at the Darling Marine Center. And we are hoping to launch the first ever foraging ecology study of striped bass in the state of Maine. So I'm looking for help from those of you that catch striped bass and maybe run charter operations and bring your fish back to the port to fillet them. I want your guts. I want your racks. So if you would like to participate in this study, it's really going to be successful through crowdsourcing and all of your help. I have flyers in the back of the room that have some directions. We also have a website that you can refer to, or you can just email me or call me. I'll be bringing on a graduate student this fall, Abby Remick, who is also going to be doing a lot of the work on this project. So basically, we've got materials. If you know you're going to land fish and you're willing to participate, I'll give you some plastic bags. I'll give you some pre-printed tags on waterproof paper. And all you need to do is keep it in a freezer, and one of us will come around and pick those racks up. We also have some partners that are helping us store those frozen racks until we can get to them and pick them up. So right now we have Saco Bay Tackle as one of our partners. GMRI is another place you can drop off racks in Portland. I'm at the Darling Marine Center up in Mid-Coast, and I believe the DMR, after some conversations today, said that they will also pick up racks for us and bring them back to Booth Bay, or you could drop them off in Booth Bay as their staff are coming around and doing the logbook survey and possibly the MREC, but we're still working that out. So please see me in the back of the room after the meeting, and I'll give you materials. Basically, the most important pieces of information that we need about the fish when you bring them back is when you caught it, so what day, where you caught it. Give me as much information as you're willing to. If it's the river, what river, upper, mid, or lower. If you were fishing on the shelf, if you have a lat long, that would be phenomenal. But I'll take whatever information about where you caught the fish as you're willing to share. Yeah, then we'll pick it up. If you don't want to save the full rack, I also would take just the stomach contents, but I'll need more information from you. Still need location, when you caught it, where, and then I would need a length of the fish, the minimum information that I would need from you. So you can write that all on a tag and just drop it in a bag and give me your guts. So see me in the back.
Thank you. All right, awesome. And Michelle is associate professor at UMaine. So keeping the research in-house, which is always great to see. All right, GMRI, Zach, up next.
Thank you very much. I'm Zach Whitener. I'm a research associate at GMRI, and I've been conducting our research on stripers for about 10 years. It's been an unfunded project, so it's thanks to the help of all of you why some of this has gotten going, and we want to keep it going. Most of the work we've been doing has been framed under what we call our Snap and Striper program, where we use photos of fish to do morphometrics to look at, basically, we're trying to determine the stock for the fish that we're fishing in Maine, whether we're getting mostly Chesapeake fish, Hudson fish, Delaware fish, and we're doing that with morphometrics for body shape analysis for the photos that some of you have sent in over the years, and also comparing that with scale, or right now with Oldworth chemistry. So the ear bones that show where the fish has been. And then now we're trying to move towards using scale chemistry, partnering with UNE as a non-lethal way to get a hard part from a fish that captures some of the same information. So we're working on a study now to compare scales and otoliths. Kind of what we're looking at with the body shape is basketballs versus torpedoes. The fish usually aren't that that dramatic of how differently they're shaped for different populations, but they can be. And so that's just a good representation of roughly how they look. So we're partnering with UNE and continuing with our great tradition of catching names with the male scale program. And hopefully we'll get some more citizen science involvement for that in the future. So we also are starting a project. We've got young of the year samples, so up and down the coast. So we can create a baseline for where these fish may have come from to see what the chemistry looks like for Chesapeake fish versus Hudson fish versus Delaware fish versus some Kennebec fish we have a few of. We're also working on diet work, and sounds like we'll be working with Humane, which is fantastic because there's no need to compete over these precious fish, and we want to make sure that we get as much out of this as possible. So feel free to email me anytime you want and coordinate dropping off fish. I would love your guts and the heads, racks, everything else. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach. All right. And now we've got UNE, Saco River.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Mohan. I'm assistant professor at the University of New England, which is in Biddeford, right on the Saco River. And my lab has been conducting an acoustic telemetry study on striped bass. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, acoustic telemetry basically works like an easy pass for fish. So we put out these receivers that are under these orange buoys here that you can see a picture of one in the Saco River. And we put these tags inside a fish, and when they swim by, that receiver puts a timestamp, a date, and time, so we can basically archive that information on the receivers. And so when a fish basically swims up and down the river, it's getting detected. And so we can ask a lot of cool research questions with those detection data sets, such as, where did a fish come from? That's something we're part, as Zach just mentioned at GMRI, using the scale chemistry to look at the core and say, is there a chemical signature that can tell us where they may have come from? We can really know where they go, very highly detailed information, because other research groups have these acoustic telemetry systems up and down the coast. We want to know within the Saco, when do fish arrive in our river? When are they leaving? Our receivers also record temperature. So we're trying to see, is there an influence of temperature on the movement patterns that we're documenting? And over time, as we put more and more tags out, and with help, we think that we can start to get answer questions about survival rates of striped bass. And so how we do this, essentially, my students that are up here in the front row, they catch the fish, and we basically make a little incision to insert a tag. It's about the size of a quarter. Inside the fish, do a little bit of surgery. So there's an internal acoustic tag. And on the outside, we put these yellow dart tag. So this is the external tag on the outside of the fish. So I have it kind of zoomed in here. And what's really important is that if you catch a fish and notice this tag, what we ask is that you look for the tag ID number. So they're basically on two locations on the tag circled in those red circles. And if you can just document the location and the date, there's a phone number on the tag. I also have flyers printed out. I'll put those on the back table so that you can have this information to report fish. And you can see we've put out 30 so far over a few years. We're going to put out 32 more tags this summer. And so this is a citizen science opportunity that if you catch a fish, please report it, release it. This is extremely useful information. We had one of our fish we tagged in Maine. An angler caught it down off of the Long Island, New York, and reported it. And so it's really useful information. We think, is that a fish that's part of that Hudson River stock? So with your help as citizen science, we think this can be, a very strong project.
Awesome.
And thank you, DMR, for letting us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks all three of you for coming. I just want to say how encouraging it is to have 3 institutions in Maine doing research on striped bass. I think this is really awesome. And are you guys going to be here throughout the meeting? So if you have questions at the end or want to participate in any of this research, please reach out to them. If you're harvesting fish, if you see a yellow tag, this stuff really counts. So please help us out. All right. And then the last one is the volunteer angler logbook, and we're gonna kind of roll this into, what did 2023 data look like from the volunteer angler logbook? So Chris, if you wanna come up, I'll kind of do a little chit chat here while you walk up. Just a reminder that this is a volunteer program for anglers in Maine through DMR, where we can collect information about length and effort and catch data. And we do use this in management. We use this during when we were seeing such like high harvest in 2022, trying to figure out what was going on. I looked to this data. So we do use this data to inform management and what moves forward. So Chris.
Thank you. I'm Chris Juranek. I lead our rec fish program at DMR. And this is one of the projects we do. All right, so I'll just read this real quick. The primary goal of the survey is to collect additional length, catch, and effort data for striped bass. Indeed, our field staff see a limited number of these fish each season due to size and bag limits for the species, as well as anglers opt in for catch and release. Striped bass length, catch, and effort data coming in from volunteer anglers like you are very valuable to Maine managers. In addition, the striped bass length frequency data coming from this program is also submitted annually to the ASMSC to aid in their assessment of the striped bass population. This is an angler science and management partnership to be proud of. All right. So this is some of the results we had. These are the results we had from last year. We had 39 participants fill out data. We have two options. We have a paper copy as well as an electronic app. And so those 39 participants, we also include anybody that's like, if they're going out in their boat fishing, so you got like 4 guys on your boat, you know, all 4 people we're counting their fish and measuring their fish. So we get a lot of trips. We had 1,300 trips targeting striped bass as either the primary or secondary target. So that's a pretty good number of trips. I didn't put up our other survey, the APAES survey, but that's close to how many interviews we get for the APAES survey. So this is pretty good data, we think. Those anglers reported, about 2,000 striped bass being caught. And as Megan mentioned, we released most of the fish, so only 5% were kept and 95% were released. So we're releasing a lot of fish, which is a good thing. All right, here's just a couple tables summarizing the data in a couple different ways. The first table shows less than 28 inches, and then the slot limit 28 to 31 inches, and then over that. So you can see only about 13% of the fish are in that slot limit. So in Maine, the rest of the fish are all protected theoretically. So that's a good thing. But the second table kind of highlights some of the concerns we're having, I think. I've got a couple different bins of the size classes of fish. Kind of the schoolie size, less than 20 inches, and 20 to 29 inches, 30 to 39, etc. And so what's concerning here, and I think, the logbook is showing what we're hearing from anglers is there's not a lot of small fish out there, and those are our fish for the next couple of years, so we're seeing only 7% of the fish are in that smaller size class. Conversely, we've got 75% in the 20 to 29 inch range, which those are some nice sized fish. If you like to fish and you're catching fish, those are nice quality fish. So that's fun. But the concern is, for the future. And I think that's why a lot of people are here tonight. And then this is just a light frequency graph. It's kind of shows the data. The average size was around 25, 26 inches last year. Anyway, so that's what we're seeing in Maine through the logbook program. And if you want to sign up, we have a sign up sheet in the back. Thank you.
But Chris, why don't you stay up here?
Oh, good.
Well, I think if there's any quick questions for Chris, we're obviously gonna have a big discussion at the end, but I don't want death by presentation here. So if you have a question, yeah, sir.
Yeah, quick question. As anglers, we get excited about bigger fish. Those might be the ones we're apt to report,
Yeah,
not those little tiny ones. And so does the data get skewed because of that? Do you adjust for it at all?
I don't think it does. We're just showing the 2023 data, but we've been doing this survey since the mid-90s, so we have good time series here. And those years when there's a lot of schoolies around, we'll see a huge spike of 18-inch fish. So I feel like people are reporting. They're reporting what they're catching. Yep.
A little unclear. So when you said there's like 4 guys in a boat, is that is one trip, one report per boat, per trip out, or does that count as 4 reports for your survey?
That counts as 4 reports. I guess that's how the MRIP NAPEA survey works. It's by the individual angler. Each trip is considered one person fishing for their day. So we're trying to compare to that, basically.
We have a couple of questions online. Dom Pucci. I'm gonna unmute you and you could ask your question, or you could unmute yourself. It's not letting me unmute. If you hit the space bar, it'll unmute you. Okay. Everybody else dropped their hand.
Okay.
Good.
Dom, we'll keep trying. Oh,
Captain Ian Sawyer.
Hello,
Yeah.
I just had a question about size based on the last strong spawning class. Is there any data that tells you what like the average size would be currently for the fish that were spawned from 2015? The strong class, or is it 2016? I get that confused sometimes.
yeah, so I think you're probably talking about the 2015 year class. That was our last really big one. I
Yeah.
think the average size is probably just over 31 inches for this year. So that's why, or it may have been just over 31 inches for last year. That's why we narrowed that slot limit last year.
Yeah, I just was wondering about this year, their average size. I understand the slot limit being adjusted and why. So I just was curious about, what the current situation was with those fish.
Yeah, if you give me a second, if we have a break, I can pull up a technical committee report that has kind of the progression or the projection of their size through time. So we can look at that. There's also that 2018 year class. That's not as big, but decent. So.
Dom, I saw you were unable to unmute yourself. If you'd like to.
Yeah, I figured it out real quickly. I'm gonna show my hand now. I will tell you one thing. This year's average fit, my average has been going up every year. My average size. I have those great statistics already in my my log, and I'm at 26 inches this year. Last year it was 25, but the most predominant fish I'm catching right now is 27. So I assume that's the 15 class. There are tons of them. And my concern is towards next year, I would hope they might move the slot up a little bit because all those 27s are going to be 28 next year. And Megan, this is more at you. But I hope we can hear what the ideas are at the Atlantic States, Marine Fisheries Committee Council, what they're going to be doing. you know, that we know all these poor spawns have been happening in Chesapeake. I hope this year is better, but still that's a bunch of years out. What are their thoughts? And one of the thoughts that can't be any good for Maine is closed seasons for no catch and release or anything. I mean, that's just untenable here. We can't catch codfish. So what do we do if we have a boat? We go mackerel fishing? I mean, that's just plain untenable. So, and I also hope they compose regulations that are enforceable. Okay, so we'll all be mackerel fishing in 2025. Because what else is there to catch in Maine? You know, it's just kind of silly. So I hope they're going to move the slot, adjust it to start protecting the 2015s also. That's just my editorial comment.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, we can talk about this. I'll touch on some of that in the management slides,
Yeah.
which I think are next. Obviously, we can talk about it a little bit more in the open discussion part, but just a quick answer. So we have our next assessment this fall, and I think that that's going to be a really pivotal point here in determining what happens over the next few years and what our probability of rebuilding is by 2029. The board does have authority to take board action following that assessment, so it can act rather quickly if we get assessment results that are not favorable or indicate, like as you're saying, you know, the slot needs to be adjusted to get off that 2015 class again. So we do have that authority, but I think the board, or my bet is the board is wanting to see that assessment first before taking an action. There's not going to be an action in season this year.
Well, yes, yeah, and that's fine. But I don't want them to do their classic of kicking the can down the road. They should be, I would hope, at the next meeting, you start planning for the, you know, to have a little damage control planning. Assume it's not going to be any much better, and because we, you know, obviously the spawns have been very poor, and even Hudson have a bad poor, and so did Virginia. Now, and also, what happened to the Kennebec reports? They've come away off the radar. That, if I remember correctly, they've basically been non-existent for the last 3 years. Is that a true statement?
So a couple of things there. I think we'll get into the management a little bit more, but I have been talking to Emily, who's a staff person at the commission, and I think the board will be talking about how we want to approach a management decision if we need to in October. So we have started planning for that. Are you talking about the young of year or the juvenile indices? Yeah, those aren't part of the management trigger anymore.
No, I know that, but they hit your advanced, you know, radar. So you got to be planning, you know, makes that for 10 years down the line. But I'm saying and the other thing though is I haven't seen a YOI young a year assessment for the Kennebec that was not a whole number recently. They're always you know, decimals of percentages. Is that it's been very poor. So has the Kennebec stopped spawning?
I don't have an answer to that. I would need to pull up the
Back to the sea room.
Talk to Searun. Is that okay? I'll get back to you on that, Dom. I have your email, so we can chat more offline.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, I'm gonna move us on. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
To the management, since that seems to be a eager topic for folks. I think that's what's next. Okay. So we talk a lot about the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Just so a little reminder on what that is. So this is a compact of the Atlantic Coast states, and they meet quarterly, usually in DC. The Striped Bass Board is 16 votes, which is actually quite a bit. And it's Maine through North Carolina. Maine gets 1 vote on that board. So we are 1 of 16 votes when we go into a management action. As I mentioned, I am a proxy for Commissioner Kelleher. So I'm one of the seats on the Striped Bass Board for Maine. We also have Representative Hepler here, who is another commissioner, not to call her out, but she's in the back. So you have actually 2 board members from Maine here at this meeting. Steve Train is your 3rd commissioner. He is a lobsterman in Casco Bay. So the 3 of us sit for the Striped Bass Board. Collectively, the 3 of us get 1 vote. So we're looking for agreement within Maine, but also majority of states. And I show the picture. I think it can be hard to visualize what these meetings are like, especially if you're just like listening online. But it's just a big hotel ballroom, probably been to a wedding in one of these. It is not super glamorous, but we all have assigned seats. We sit around a big U-shaped table, and that's kind of what it looks like. So a lot of what the board has been working on the last, I'll say last year, was based off of this emergency action that happened in May of 2023. So I just wanted to start there as our building spot. So in May 2023, we get information that harvests doubled from 2021 to 2022. And it was unexpected because we had the same measures both years, but I think it's pretty clear that that 2015 year class moved into the slot limit. And in some states that resulted in a lot of harvest that happened. And the unfortunate part is we're obviously trying to rebuild the striped bass stock by 2029. We haven't had great recruitment. So that makes it pretty hard to rebuild. And the effect of that increase in harvest was we went from almost a 90% chance of rebuilding by 2029, which is pretty incredible for fishery management standards, to less than 15%. So our perception of success, I would say, really changed within 1 year. And as a result, the board implemented a 31-inch maximum size in the recreational fishery. We went through a state emergency rulemaking before Memorial Day weekend last year. So we've been at a 28 to 31-inch slot since May of last year. So anytime the commission does an emergency action, they then need to go through their kind of regular process to incorporate that into the fishery management plan. So that's a lot of what we've done between May and January of 2024. So in January, we took final action on addendum 2. And again, this was incorporating that emergency action, but it was also a bit broader than this. So we kept that 28 to 31-inch slot limit in the ocean recreation fishery. That's what Maine is a part of. In the Chesapeake Bay, there were some pretty big changes. They are now on a consistent slot of 19 to 24 inches and a 1-fish bag limit. And I just want to highlight what a big accomplishment that is to get all 3 Chesapeake Bay states with the same slot and bag limit. I feel like this kind of flew under the radar a little bit, but this is huge to have like uniform measures in that in the Chesapeake Bay. Previously, they all had different slot limits. They all had different bag limits, which is possible, it turns out, with 3 jurisdictions. So a really big win there, I think, in addendum 2. The commercial fishery took a 7% quota reduction. And then for states that allow recreational filleting at sea, they established some requirements for that. So that was what we did between May and January of 2024. But the board has continued to be quite busy at the beginning of this year. So whenever we take final action on an addendum, we have to set an implementation date. That's May 1 of this year. And we have to approve state implementation plans. So it's usually draft or final regulations from each state that show, hey, we're in compliance with what the commission has put forward. So we actually had 2 meetings on that, but as of May 1, everyone is in compliance. So that is always good news. The board has also formed a work group on recreational release mortality, and I want to take a little bit of time to talk about this because I think there's maybe some anxiety in Maine in particular about this work group. But I want to start by saying this is not a decision-making group. So this group is intended to dig into the weeds a little bit on a tough topic. And for a little bit of background here, the board's taken, I think, 3 actions in the last 5 years, so they've been pretty busy. Every time we go through an action, the conversation about rec release mortality comes up. And there's usually some sort of measure that's either a gear modification, so we did circle hooks recently, or no targeting. The idea of no targeting closures comes up. And sometimes it goes out for public comment, sometimes it doesn't. And there's obviously different perceptions on the board about kind of the success or potential failure of no targeting closures. So we've kind of been skirting around this issue as a board. And so the work group is made up of board members. And really their task is to dive deeper into this topic and have some tough conversations about recreational release mortality. It's now, I think, around 50% of total mortality in this fishery. So it's a big chunk. A lot of our measures to date have focused on reducing harvest, but we're running out of tools, admittedly. And as I'll mention on the next slide, we have a stock assessment coming up. We'll see what the results are there, but it could lead to some challenging conversations. So the work group has specific tasks. So there's a order of operations for work groups at the commission. We try to give them specific tasks, and their tasks for this work group are to review any impacts we can see or the enforceability of existing no targeting closures. So actually some of the Chesapeake Bay states have no targeting closures. So are those working? Has their Marine Patrol been able to write a ticket? Is it enforceable or is it just goodwill? We talked briefly at the beginning about that mass DMF discard mortality study. So looking into some of the data there, is there anything we can glean from that in terms of gear modifications that might be helpful in reducing discard mortality? You can actually go onto the mass DMF website and see the data populated in real time. And it's really fascinating to see some of the results in terms of what lure types or bait or temperatures, things like that, are resulting in higher discard mortality. So I think that could be a really good source of information for the board. The third task is to identify any assessment sensitivity runs that could inform a board discussion on release mortality. So again, we have that assessment in the fall. And I think some questions that may be super helpful to ask are, if we reduce the discard mortality rate from 9 to 7%, what does that do for the stock? Do we see a big return on that? Do we not? How do we balance, wanting to maintain effort with a discard mortality rate? So I think those are questions that this work group can formulate, and those will be sensitivity runs that are run this fall. And then the fourth thing the board was very interested in is public scoping on this topic. Obviously, a lot of interest in catch and release fishing, particularly in Maine. A lot of thoughts on things like no targeting closures. So the board is interested in some sort of public scoping. I don't know if the work group, we'll just have to kind of monitor their progress. I don't know if the work group will be able to pull that off by October, which is when their report out is due. But I'm hoping that they can at least kind of come up with a template or an outline of how the board should do scoping. So that is what we're hoping to see from that work group. It is made up of board members. Their first meeting is June 24th, I believe. They're open to the public, they're webinars, so anyone can listen in, but something for folks to know that is going on, and you can follow along on that work group. And then, as I've alluded to a couple times here, looking forward, I think the really big thing here is the stock assessment in 2024. So as has been mentioned, we haven't been having great recruitment in the Chesapeake Bay. That is a key area for striped bass spawning. We're trying to rebuild by 2029. When you don't have baby fish, but you're trying to rebuild, it's a hard equation to do that. So I'm personally interested in, what do the projections indicate is our probability of rebuilding by 2029? Did we see a positive impact from that emergency action in 2023? So are we hopefully at some number or percentage that's higher than 15%? And if we're less than 50%, do we need to be taking additional measures to rebuild by 2029? And I just want to flag, I think this October 2024 board meeting is going to be really important. And board meetings are open to the public and anyone can listen in online. You can listen in real time or you can go on YouTube after and listen in. But if you're interested in striped bass, this should be on your calendar because this is going to be a really important meeting. So I don't have the specific date in October yet, but keep a lookout on the commission agenda, or excuse me, the commission website, and that will be posted at some point. And then just to do a quick recap of the Maine state regs for 2024, the short is there's no changes from 2023. We already have that 28 to 31 inch slot limit in place, so we're good to go there. I've received a lot of correspondence on the Saco River over the last 5 days. So I just want to flag that this will be a discussion topic when we get to the discussion, but just a reminder of what we did last year. In June of last year, we took emergency action to expand that existing closure by the dam, and that was in response to a lot of reports about high discard mortality. We had patrol out there seeing that discard mortality, so we took emergency action. We adopted that via our regular rulemaking in August. So what that means is that closure, that expanded closure, is permanently in our regulations now. So that's in effect for all of 2024. Again, I'm expecting some conversation on if additional action is needed in the Saco River today. So I'm all ears on that and probably have some questions for you guys about what you're seeing, but wanted to flag that. All right, I think next is the MRIP. So maybe I'll just pause here for if there's any few questions. Obviously, we'll talk a lot more afterwards, but any questions on commission or our state regs for 2024? Yeah.
Yeah, you said the October meeting is attempt to evaluate the impact of the measures taken last year. Can you explain a little bit what would it, how are you going to measure that?
Yeah, so my understanding is the terminal year, the last year of the data that goes into this assessment is 2023. So that's when we took the action to narrow the slot. It can be difficult with only 1 year of data to see an impact from management. So that's, I think, part of the question is, are we able to see that positive, hopefully positive impact from narrowing the slot in the ocean in 2023? Do we need more years of data to kind of conclusively say what's happening there? I think the MRIP data is actually pretty telling. So we'll show that next, what happened in Maine and what happened elsewhere. So we may have an idea of where we may be, but also formally running projections in the assessment, I think is going to be really critical, both on kind of incorporating the high harvest in 2022 and then the hopefully reduction in harvest in 2023.
We have 3 online.
How do they do the stock assessment in Chesapeake? Is it angler or is some kind of field something?
So we're all one coastwide stock. So the Chesapeake Bay is included in our stock assessment that we're a part of. They use fishery independent data, so things like surveys that aren't done in conjunction with fishermen, but also fishery dependent data. So, you know, what was the catch, what was the discard mortality, MRIP data, things like that. So there's a model, and that's how they produce estimates of striped bass biomass. Yeah, and I'll say it can be a slightly technical conversation, but this is really important. Like if you're interested in striped bass management, you don't have to understand the model runs or the coefficient on whatever, but understanding the outputs and where we are in terms of rebuilding, that is important. All right, I think we have some hands online. Craig, you wanna?
Yeah, Captain Ian Sawyer, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about mortality rates. I've read things about mortality rates increasing when salinity is lower. Wondering if you have any data that would indicate that. I was curious about that. That's it.
Yeah, great question. Corinne is actually going to talk about that in a little bit. So I'm at parking lot that question till her presentation.
And we have a question from Taylor Bobro. Sorry if I butcher anybody's name.
No worries there. How are you?
Good.
I guess my question is, it would seem to me that given these 5 years of poor recruitment in the Chesapeake and a year of bad recruitment in the Hudson, unless something really spectacular happens, it would seem that the next stock assessment is going to be more bad news about the state of the stock overall. And it would then seem that it's almost impossible, as you mentioned earlier, the toolkit is kind of dwindling that seasonal closures will be probably unavoidable if that were the case. I know law enforcement committees in the past have said that no targeting closures would be next to impossible in terms of enforcement. But my question is, it seems that there's not an overwhelming at the ASMSC board, an overwhelming support for no harvest seasonal closures. And so I guess two questions. Why is that the case? Because it would seem that if enforcement, if it's difficult to enforce no targeting closures, I understand why. There's other fish to be caught. But if you're enforcing a no harvest closure, it is enforceable because currently you have a slot limit and you're able to enforce to some degree checking people for taking overs and unders. So why wouldn't it be more attainable for the board to want to do a no harvest seasonal closure and you know, somewhere like the New York Bight, Raritan Bay in New Jersey and New York, when those fish, you know, stage to go up and down the Hudson, they get absolutely destroyed there. And so part two to the question is, so one is why does it seem like no harvest closures aren't such a viable and good option, is one. And then two is it possible for the technical committee in some way, shape, or form to come up with a number of how many fish would be saved in a no harvest closure situation, even given the 9% mortality rate during catch and release? So whatever that total is, subtract that 9%. And I guess, wouldn't that be a good thing for us to do at this point? Even if it's a little, you know, a little bit on the net positive side, everything should be counting at this point. And I don't see why no harvest closures aren't a really good option going forward.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. I'll answer the second one first and just say, yes, the TC can estimate impacts from something like a harvest closure, excuse me, on both the harvest of striped bass, but also the increase in the releases. So they are able to estimate that. I believe it was Amendment 7. We did consider some closures and they did those estimates. So we have as a board talked about harvest closures. I don't think they got voted in at the end of that discussion. But I think kind of your question about no harvest closures versus no targeting closures gets kind of at the heart of the tension that's on the striped bass board. So you have some states that are primarily catch and release, and you also have some states that harvest striped bass and their constituents value the ability to harvest striped bass. And so some of those states believe that the measures to date have really been focused on targeting those that harvest striped bass, and you know, those who catch and release maybe haven't felt the same pain. But that's me trying to express what I think some of the thoughts are of those states. I'm not saying that's the main opinion, but it gets to the tensions of the board. There's 16 votes. There's a very wide variety of opinions and views on the striped bass board, and that's the great part about the striped bass board, and also the challenge is trying to get a majority.
Question from Ryan Dobbins.
Okay, and then we're gonna go on to MRIS data after this.
How's it going?
Hey, Ryan.
So you were talking before about the Chesapeake area and how they changed their slot limit. Was that to protect those fish in that 2015 year class?
It was, I would have to think back to the analysis if it was specific to the 2015 class or more thinking about both the 2015 and the 2018 year class. Because I think a lot of those 20 have probably already gone out of the Chesapeake Bay at this point. But the idea was to improve conservation and sustainability overall for striped bass. So, you know, before, if everyone's on a different slot limit, you know, you could be in Maryland protected and go swim over to Virginia and you're harvested. That's not a good, it's not a good conservation strategy for that region. So that was part of it as well.
So
It
where
was
I was,
also part of they were required a percentage of reduction in their recreational fishery. And so that is the tool that they use to get the majority of that percentage of reduction in their recreational fishery. The latest states that just got their approvals for recreational measures, each one of them had a different percentage that they needed to capture in those regulations.
all right, I guess where I was going with that was if it was to protect those fish, why is a state like Maine or, Rhode Island, anywhere, why are we still allowing the harvest of that class if that's the class we want to keep alive, keep reproducing?
So, I mean, we can have this conversation for sure in our open discussion. Obviously, we're primarily a catch and release fishery, but I suspect there's some people that do value harvest in Maine, and we can have that conversation. But that's at this point why we haven't moved to catch and release only. We'll see what the assessment says. It may prompt us to have some really tough conversations if we're not seeing recruitment. But at this point, we are kind of following the ocean rec measures, and I think there is value in all of the states being on the same slot limit for good management of striped bass. All right, I'm going to move us to MRIP. I see your hand, so we'll go to you in the open discussion if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Die first.
I appreciate your patience. All right, so Corinne's going to go through the MRIP data for 2023. Oh, coming at me. I'll let you drive this.
Yeah, so we're going to go over what the MRIP or the Marine Recreational Information Program saw in 2023. And to do that, we're looking at comparing it to 2021 and 2022. So you'll see Maine through North Carolina here. And the blue bar, so the first bar is 2021. The second bar, which is the orangish red color, is 2022. And that third bar over the state is 2023. Maine, we actually had an increase in reg harvest of fish after the new regulations went in. So kind of business as usual here. Some of the other states, Massachusetts and especially New York in particular, had some good reductions in their recreational harvest after those measures went in. Maryland also had some, and with the new measures going in place in Maryland with a slot limit, that'll help limit that for 2024 as well. But then, as you see, for Virginia, had an uptick as well. So as you see, 2023 MRIP is showing a mixed bag of whether things actually did reduce or not. And if we look at the total catches, the first one was harvest, this is total catch. You can see that there are a lot of states, the majority of them here, that the total catch did go down in 2023. However, in some of those states where the harvest was going down, like New Jersey, their total catch actually increased, and that's due to the discards. So this is becoming, and it always has been a huge fishery along the East Coast, and it's staying a huge fishery and increasing even more. And so, yeah, this is the importance of why we need to keep really thinking about how this is going. Part of this might be a migration northward with climate change we might talk about, or just those size classes moving in. So we need to keep thinking of different ways and different whys of what's happening here and keeping an eye on these things. If somebody from MRIP approaches you at the dock, I encourage you to participate in that. That's valuable information, and it helps us when we're making those regulations. So looking at for Maine, how many trips we're targeting striped bass. You can see that from 2021 to 2022, there was a significant decrease in total number of trips. However, 2023 stayed about the same. There's a little bit more, but it's about the same for total catch, but sorry, I was talking total catch there. But trips have pretty much stayed the same. So that's kind of one of the things we look at as well, is how many people are really going after these. But you can see that 2023 was the most trips that we had through MRIP that targeted striped bass in Maine. Okay, so now I'm going to go into a little bit of how temperature impacts striped bass. So how climate change, what's the potential effects that it's having on this species? So striped bass have a very complex reproductive strategy, going into fresh water, requiring flows of rivers, the temperature gradients. It's very complicated in the reproductive strategy of striped bass. It's a very short duration of their spawn. They're very sensitive to temperature, both the adults and the juveniles, and the eggs. And they have very specific prey selection, and they have very specific larval requirements. So as temperature is raising, it's increasing how vulnerable striped bass are to these temperatures in different systems. Also, these extreme weather events that are occurring are affecting striped bass, or have the potential to affect striped bass moving forward. Extreme weather events, they'll affect the growth, the mortality. They affect when and where they're migrating to, and the abundance of fish that are migrating. And then also transport, so how the eggs and the young of year are moving through the system really differs in extreme weather events. In the Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle Sound, which is the southernmost extent of these migrant fish, if you have major flooding in the spring, it goes out into the floodplains, and the water stays there, and all of the young of the year go out into the floodplains, and then the water recedes, and they don't always get back into the river. So these extreme weather conditions really can affect striped bass. So as I kind of went into a little bit of this, what does water temperature affect in striped bass life cycles? So it affects the time it takes for an egg to hatch, mortality in all stages of their life cycle, eggs, larval, adults. They all have different ranges that they prefer of water temperatures. Release mortality, higher the temperature is, more likely that fish is to die due to release mortality. If it's over 70 degrees, if the water temperature is over 70 degrees, you really shouldn't be doing catch and release, because that fish is likely going to die. They also can struggle a little bit when it's below 50 degrees with catch and release too, getting some of that thermal shock depending on what the air temperature is. Down in the Chesapeake, they say a good rule of thumb is if it's over 91 degrees, don't go fishing after 10 o'clock in the morning. Things like that. Growth is really affected by temperature. The amount of yolk, or how fast they use the yolk in their eggs. The activity level of the fish. So the hotter it is, the more active they are. And it actually burns more calories, and they have to, it's a vicious cycle. Their metabolic rate, their feeding, their habitat suitability, and both their day-to-day vertical migration. So if they're hiding in colder water or coming to the surface, is affected, and that can affect their feeding. and their seasonal migration of moving between here and North Carolina. So with that, what kind of are these temperature ranges? So spawning temperatures for striped bass, they prefer to spawn between 50 and 73 degrees. The eggs, and this is all water temperature. The eggs hatch at different rates depending on how warm the water is. So if the water's at that lower end of the range, it takes about 70 hours for an egg to hatch. If it's at the higher end of that range, it takes about 30 hours for an egg to hatch. The importance there is that striped bass have buoyant eggs, and their eggs have to stay buoyant the entire time, because if the egg touches the bottom, that young of year will suffocate. And so these eggs have to stay in the water column for that striped bass to hatch. So that's the importance of this timing of how long it takes the eggs to hatch and water temperature. So therefore, recruit success depends on the water temperature, but not only the water temperature of when that reproduction is occurring, but the water temperature of overwintering is actually having an impact on striped bass as well. They're finding that the when overwinter temperatures are higher and the hydrologic conditions are still perfect, and zoological the food is available, they're still having spawning failures because of something that's happening within the physiology of fish. That's some of the newer research that's coming out on striped bass. And then also zooplankton availability is becoming a problem as well, because this is a short period of time that they have their spawn. The Chesapeake and North Carolina is finding that the zooplankton bloom and when the striped bass are hatching is no longer lining up. And so some of the striped bass are starving to death because their food's not available. So that's a current research that's happening in North Carolina and in Virginia and Maryland is taking zooplankton samples and the young of year to see if there is a mismatch now of the timing due to the water temperature being warmer in the wintertime. And mortality increases as the sea surface temperature increases. When average temperatures, oops, that one I forgot to change from sea. When the average water temperatures are high, it'll actually cause like a catastrophic failure of that spawning year class. So now you're all warm and fuzzy. We're going to talk about how Canada manages their striped bass. So Canada has 4 confirmed spawning locations. They are the blue river systems on this map. And with those 4 confirmed spawning locations, they have 5 populations of striped bass, which are assessed by 3 population units and managed by 2 regions. So what I'm going to talk about is, so here's this one right here is their populations. So what I'm going to talk about is this southern of the 2 regions because their management is different between those 2, but this is the region that is right next to us. And this is called their maritime region. So this region is open year-round in Canada for angling only. And from May 10th through June 10th, they have an artificial fly or unbaited lure requirement with a single hook, and that's in 2 of their river systems. They have a 1 fish per day limit, and that fish has to be above 68 centimeters, which is about just shy of 28 inches. And then May 10th through June 10th, it's catch and release only in one of their river systems and in Grand Lake. And that's a spawning closure. They don't require license for their tidal waters. But you do need one for coastal waters. But those are from the province that you're in. So here's a little bit of their spawner estimates in Canada. As you can see, just like in the US, they had those 1990 years weren't so good. But in starting, and this is the newest I could find with some of their stuff. It's a little hard sometimes to find their newer. But starting in the early 2000s, they had improvement just like the United States did. And that also was seen in their other river systems and their catch. They kept their catch limited. Once they moved into the 2000s and they saw they didn't let the catch increase too much. So that does it for what I have for Canada right now.
All right, stay up here for
Okay,
it. All right, so we're gonna do questions on MRIF data, temperature, Canada, and then we'll go into open discussion. And
Let's start with this first question.
I promised you first.
Thank you. My name is Gene McKenna. I've been fishing since the 50s. And one of the few benefits of being old is that you have a long perspective on things. I can remember when the striped bass crashed back in the 80s, maybe. A good close person to me was selling every fish he could catch. And I told him he was eating the seed corn. And if my information is correct, the slot limit of 28 to 31 are spawning fish. That's eating the seed corn. I was always proud of Maine in past years where we had a slot limit of 20 to 26, which are not spawning fish. So you can take that, bring it home, grill it up, have a nice meal. I can only assume that the mortality rate of commercial fishing is 100%. And we're arguing about 7 or 9%. I can't remember the last striped bass that I took home. If we are serious about protecting the striped bass fishery in the 11 states, as I counted them, we should be adopting the slot limit that's in place on the Chesapeake. We should not be killing spawning fish. That makes no management sense. I would be more than happy to pay for my saltwater fishing license. That would give us a seat at the table, potentially. It would give us skin in the game. Commercial fishermen have all the skin in the game. We're just people out for recreation. Well, to me, that recreation is a big part of my life. It has been for 60 plus years. And then my last point is, if there are 16 votes in only 11 states, how do those votes get appropriated?
So we have District of Columbia, they get a vote. We have Potomac River Fisheries Commission, they get a vote. NOAA Fisheries gets a vote, and I believe US Fish and Wildlife is your fourth missing vote.
Thank you.
Yep. And just for fun, Pennsylvania is also on.
Pennsylvania, yeah.
Pennsylvania is the one that most people forget about. And I'll let you get people, for now, take care.
Yeah, just a short question to confirm his comment. What is the spawning length? What are the fish that are most important to spawning?
I don't know it off the top of my head.
Roughly.
I don't either. I actually wrote down the question. I thought it was.
So I will say that that initial slot limit that was, so striped bass will spawn at 2 years for their first spawn. So that
That's
is,
very short. That's a very small fish.
it's a very small fish. But you know, as they get larger, they'll produce more eggs.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times they have a higher, health of those eggs. But, it differs in the 4 watersheds that are the like major watersheds of what that size exactly is. And so that makes it a little bit different too.
That statement about the slot limit being critical spawners
Mhm.
may or may not be.
So slot limits are created to find the, what I'm gonna call best spot to protect as many spawners as possible, but also limit discard mortality. So you don't want the slot to be too narrow, because then you're throwing a lot of fish away. And as Megan said, there's a 9% estimate that those 9% of the fish are dying. And so you want the slot to be wide enough to encompass, you know, a wider breadth of that size. And so you kind of find that sweet spot of when they're like 100% mature, to when catch mortality is limited. If that kind of makes sense.
All right, we have 2 hands online, and I'll just ask folks or remind folks about MRIP, temperature, Canada. We'll go into an open discussion just after this. So Captain Ian Sawyer, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. My question before was about salinity, and I didn't see any figure about salinity in that PowerPoint or whatever you want to call it.
Sorry, I forgot to add, that was supposed to be in my talking points on the temperature as well. So salinity also plays a part in discard mortality in the same way that temperature does, because salt acts as a buffer to the gills of fish. And so the lower the salinity level, when you're putting them back, will stress them out more than when they're at full salinity. And so there is a difference in catch and release in fresher water versus in the ocean. But a lot of the catch and release studies on striped bass happen in the river systems where the majority of the catch and release is happening, at least down the ones that I know of that are the more southern states that have the catch and release studies. And then the ones in the northern part of the range, they're kind of like close to shore accessible, like bay areas. So it's kind of a little bit higher salinity on those studies.
So I guess, is it fair to say that when you have a perfect storm of a lot of fresh water and a high temperature that, you know, up in these rivers, that the fish are basically, you know, doomed? You know what I mean? It just kind of seems that way to me, especially lately.
As management practices wise, I would say don't go targeting striped bass when we've had a lot of rain and the temperature is hot.
Okay, and so in my mind, that would mean that the upriver situation for fishing should be looked at heavily then. Is that fair to say as well?
It just depends on a lot of things. So it depends on how long they're in that river system and other kind of
okay
things.
So this year,
it can be a concern.
This year we got a really heavy alewife run in the majority of main rivers, and the striped bass seem to be lingering up there, getting hammered on, and it's worrisome to me. You know, that's just my point of view on that. I guess I'll leave my comment till the general comment period, but.
Yeah, I appreciate that. No, I appreciate those comments though. And these are things that, like, you know, as a person who wants to be conservative in your fishing, that you kind of like think about before you go out fishing, like what's the water temperature today? What's the air temperature today? You know, what's the weather been like lately? Where am I fishing? And then kind of take that into account of what you're targeting that day, like if
Yeah.
it's gonna be striped bass and stuff like
I,
that. So
I personally never fish upriver, like just don't and won't, so.
yeah, and then it also impacts like how you're releasing them and the importance of, you know, not keeping them out of the water and how you're handling that fish and not touching its gills and all that stuff plays into it as well. So there can definitely be a perfect storm of events that occurs. So it's hard to nail down exactly which one of those is the knife that killed it, but it's a lot of times a combination of all of those things.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, I see Taylor has a hand up, and then we're gonna go to open discussion after that.
Hey, Taylor Vavra from Stripers Forever. Just two quick things. One, just on the previous person's comments, I think it would be wishful thinking and for the state to think that every angler would be as responsible as you just discussed. And while I wish that were the case, it would seem to me anyway that if there's a perfect storm where salinity and water temperature and all of these things are happening, that it should be monitored by the state and fishing should be allowed or not allowed based on those findings, not left up to the angler to make that call. But that's the first thing. My second question was just regarding the Canadian stock. To my understanding, I could be wrong, correct me if I am, that the coastal migratory stock from North Carolina to Maine is genetically different than the Canadian stock. And I guess I'm just curious, given Maine's location, if it's been looked into as to whether or not there's any crossover, if that is the case, they're genetically different. And if so, how much and how does that really relate to the state of Maine's impact on the stock in terms of catch and release mortality and everything else, if there is a mix of two genetically different stocks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start with that one. So yes, they're a different genetic stock. However, that research was done quite a while ago. So how much mixing may be occurring now, not sure of, but I will say that in years where Canada has a very large spawn or like a very large age group that like moves through the system, I'm sure there is some mixing that's occurring. They'll kind of move around. So there's probably a bit. The unfortunate thing is that somewhere in a stock assessment, you have to decide where the cutoff is. So that's where that kind of becomes difficult. But as you find that the genetics starts to shift in a population towards them being closer to the other population, then yeah, you do have to start taking that into consideration. But the last research I saw, they were still separate.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious thinking of the acoustic tagging, if you guys will get any returns in Canada. That would be really
What I've
interesting.
heard from Trevor Avery, who runs the Striped Bass Research Group at a community
Yeah.
university, they think that they're completely separate than ours, and they
Yeah.
don't believe their fish leave the Bay of Fundy, which I don't believe, but he's convinced.
I
I'm
mean,
sure there's some straying
I
at
would-
least, but.
I would like a tagging study
Yeah.
to confirm that. I mean, I will say that North Carolina, for instance, has the migratory stock of striped bass, but then they have 4 other stocks of resident striped bass. So that may be what Canada is. It may be more of a resident striped bass that stays in its natal range. They do move up and down the systems and into the sounds, but they don't do that big migration up the coast, the rest of the population of the North Carolina fish. So this is the joy that you all get from me coming up from North Carolina. I'm on both ends now. There's one question in the back.
Can I just touch on something? Part of the biggest issue with the genetics questions is that we don't get we get so many different varieties of fish coming to Maine that are from everywhere. So it's really hard to get our native species unless they're young of the year. I do the young of the year survey in the Kennebec River. So we get such low recruitment lately, or at least we catch so few, that it's hard to have a sample and base the genetics on those. So we can't compare those to other river systems. Yeah. So that's part of the issue when it comes to genetics and realizing the different genetic strains in different rivers.
So that's some of the great research that they're doing, genetics wise or like natal range wise. And then also that's where tagging comes in, like tagging programs come in, where they tag them in their natal areas. So a lot of the striped bass, so there's a good portion of striped bass that are tagged when they're fingerlings. And then there's another portion that are tagged when they're adults. So reporting tags is really important for that information, because that's how we know where the fish from all of these different regions are going. Because also not only, so they're kind of programmed to go spawn again in where they came from. So a lot of the states have parentage ways to look at things now. So instead of looking at the genetics, they'll look at the like the full genetics. They'll look at just one little snip of the genetics to know if it's a wild parent or a parent that was put in stocking wise. But they could also, in some of those, get what natal stream they came from, and that's where tagging comes into. Oops, I will migrate up.
Awesome. Thanks, Corinne, for doing all that work. All right, so we're gonna go into discussion here. Just a few questions to prompt any thoughts you have. You know, how has fishing been in Maine? What concerns do you have, and how should we, you know, be promoting sustainability in Maine? As we look forward to the next commission stock assessment, what are your concerns? What is your feedback? What would you want to tell your Maine commissioners? I'm here, Representative Hepler's here. This is a great opportunity to let us know what you want Maine to be considering as we move forward. And I think it may be helpful too. I commented, I had received a lot of emails about the Saco River, so I'll just kind of briefly summarize those, and folks can respond as you'd like to those. So I'm hearing still concerns about discard mortality in the Saco River. I'm trying to get a better sense of, is that happening because people are in the expanded closure, so they're fishing where they shouldn't be, or is that happening outside that closure, so we maybe need to consider a broader area? I'm curious if folks are seeing high discard mortality in other dams or other systems. So is it like just in the Saco River that we're having this problem, or is it elsewhere? And then I've also heard concerns about the use of river herring as bait and the high discard mortality that's being seen there. So that's what I've heard in the last 5 days in terms of emails. So we're going to open it up. I'm going to try and alternate in-person versus webinar, and we'll see how it goes. We're taking notes, so this is our time to listen and hear from you guys. So I'll start in the back area.
My question is sort of touching on something we got to earlier, and that's, what's the tipping point going to be when the commission next meets to determine whether or not, you know, what is the probability of making the 2029 target or not? The reason I asked that is I think back to was around 2002 when the decision was whether or not to go to 2 fish for the recreational harvest. I don't know if anybody else was in one of these meetings during that time when they were talking about that. And a couple of my friends thinking this is not a good idea. We're going to be back here in 10 years dealing with this. And in fact, we were back into it, dealing with it in 10 years and pulled back to 1. So that's my question. So where are we, what is the tipping point and what would be the palatability of like considering the mortality quota
Yeah,
as opposed to the target quota? Because that's, I mean, if you look back at it historically, the biggest increase in the station came from when we had, we went to 36, we had a total, moratorium. Then we went to 36 and it slowly came down to 33, 32. And that's when you got that big thrust coming through in the late 90s. So that's my question. Is like, what's the tipping point and how do we prevent ourselves from falling off the cliff?
yeah. So I'm gonna, I guess, try and answer that in terms of thinking about the probability of rebuilding by 2029, because I think that's what the board's gonna be looking at that assessment. The easiest answer is it's a board decision, right? But typically, I would say 50% probability is what folks are looking for at a minimum in terms of a probability of rebuilding, just kind of like rule of thumb in fisheries management. Now it gets a little iffy if you're like at 48 or 49, do you take action, do you not? That's another conversation, but I think generally folks want to see at least a 50% probability of rebuilding by 2029. And some states likely want a higher probability than that. All right, I think I said I'd do alternate.
Yeah, so Taylor, your hand's the first one that I had up. Unless that was a holdover from your last question.
Yeah, so sorry, that was a holdover.
Oh, no worries. I'll drop it for you.
Thank you.
So Captain Brian Rosa.
Hello.
Yes.
So regarding, you had mentioned the sweet spot for the slot is kind of finding that sweet spot being a part of figuring out the proper slot limits and that type of thing as far as percentage of rebuilding. And just to kind of tie that into the discussion on the Saco River, Canada does it, right, as far as the fly only, artificial lure only in the rivers. Has there been any discussion as far as limiting estuaries, tidal estuaries, rivers? I mean, even in just in the months of May and June, to things like that, single fly, single lure, no trebles, or even just artificial only, because as you know, I think Ian might have mentioned it, a bunch of folks have mentioned it online at this point as well. The herring are so thick in there, there's so many fish that wouldn't it make sense to basically limit the amount of catch and release mortality as well as the amount of harvest, but just by making it a little more difficult? Because I can attest to the fact that even when in a time like right now, there are, I would argue, hundreds of fish stacked up in a 40-foot wide section of river. There's also plenty out front in the ocean where the water is 58 degrees. It's completely salt water. And like you discussed, the release mortality rates are much better, or I guess better would be the word. So has there been a discussion about that as far as management of the rivers and kind of like the Kennebec in that sense?
Yeah, so at the commission, I don't recall us having that type of conversation. But in Maine, I think it's a conversation we can have. And certainly some of the emails I got over the weekend were asking for things like expanding the Kennebec spawning protections to additional rivers. So definitely looking for some feedback on that tonight from folks, just so folks know the process. We have to go through rulemaking to do that. And my preference would be if we go down that route to do a regular rulemaking process, so we get the public comment as we're developing it. But that's how we would implement something like that. All right, in the room, yeah, go for it.
I think what you just mentioned, is artificial only, single hook only, no bait in any river for the month of May and June is a fantastic idea. I would say most of the mortality that I've seen is coming from live bait use. And it seems like most of the live bait use comes with a disregard for the fish themselves.
Okay, thank you. All right.
So next online, we have Captain Ian Sawyer.
Yeah. So I've been fishing for stripers for the most of my life, and I fish really hard. I fish pretty much every day, and you know, there are no small fish to be had at all. Like 2017, 2019 through 2019, you know, catch 50, 60 fish in an outing, you know, 18 to 22 inches. You're lucky if you see one now. So it is dire straits for these fish, period. Like I believe that's the case. There are people that don't. They want to sit there and blame the states south of us and all this, but the truth is we're in trouble. That's the way I see it. So as far as what Maine can do, and Maine's kind of always a front runner in my mind with conservation for not just stripers, not just these fish, but everything. Maine should lead by example and set higher standards than the rest of the coast. Like, let's say, expanding Kennebec regulations to include the entire state. Not just up in rivers, but out front. No live bait till July 1st. You know, one treble hook on a lure, or, you know, I guess barbless treble hook, or, you know, 2 single hooks. Implementing things like closures for big events of fresh water, like huge rainstorms. If the salinity levels go down in a river, shut it down. I mean, people say that's impossible, but I disagree. I think if there's a will, there's a way. You know what I mean? So same thing for temperature. Like they do out in Montana, they close rivers to trout fishing after a certain time of day. Shut it down. As far as the Saco River is concerned, I think it's not just the Saco River. I think the problem is in a lot of these rivers near dams. But the Saco River is unique because it's pretty shallow compared to like the Kennebec or the Penobscot, and it warms really fast. And because of that, I think it's worse than the rest of the rivers in the conversation. So, you know, I don't think that herring should be allowed up in there. I think that herring should be banned as a bait in general. If, you know, some of the concerns that I hear from people that get mad about or mad at me when I talk about the Saco and this whole situation, they're like, well, the kids, you know, the kids, like, it's nice to take my kids there. Well, then, you know, maybe make it kids only from shore there. And if it were up to me, the line would be below Cow Island, no fishing, boat or from shore. The place is a mess. And I could go on, but in the interest of time and people, you know, not being up too late, I got to put my kids to bed soon. My wife's on a business trip, so I'll just leave it at that. I could say a lot more, but that's where I'm at. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, I saw a hand all the way over there. Yeah.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ben Viscator. I'm from Lyman, Maine. I also wanted to suggest that we do more to address the high mortality rate in the Saco River. I've been fishing there since 2012. Every year, you can't get near the dam, but I'll see dead fish floating in the river, washed up on the shores. Unfortunately, this year is no different. I was out 2 weeks ago on my kayak. I counted 5 dead fish in the section from Cow Island up to the dam. Size range from 20 to 35 inches. To me, this is not acceptable. I think we can do more to help protect these fish.
Thank you.
Next online is Dom.
Hi. I just want to reiterate one more thing. You know, no targeting option is not an option in Maine. You know, you've got a lot of charter captains who only do striped bass fishing now. There's nothing else to do. How do you set a no targeting thing? That's got to be a non-starter here. Are you going to have a lot of people making believe they're fishing for mackerel? I mean, of all the things that people talk about, yeah, we can go to one hook, that's fine. We can do the kind of things in the Kennebec. But when people start talking about no targeting, I just don't know how it's viable. It's just not, it's not like you're on in Long Island in New York where they can go fluke fishing or go for porgies, not pogies. They can go for weak fish. They can go for black sea bass. Although we are starting to see some black sea bass, but it's just there's nothing else here. And I don't know, Megan, I'm directing this right at you. How it can even be considered.
Well, I think that's what the work group is focused on, right? We have some states that are using it now and I think eager to use it as a tool moving forward. And then we have other states that have expressed a lot of concern, as you noted, particularly about lack of enforceability. So the board's kind of skirted and struggled with this topic. I'm hoping that the work group, it's kind of a cheesy term to say, but it's like a safe space for the board to talk through this. It's a lot of pressure when you're around the board table to say the right thing. And I think people just need an opportunity to kind of work it through. And it could very well be that the comments or the recommendations coming out of that work group are, this is a no-go. We do have pretty clear guidance, I would say, from our law enforcement committee and the commission that no targeting is one of the least enforceable measures we have. So I'm sure that will be discussed as a group, but I am really curious to hear, Maryland is a state that has used no targeting closures, and I'm very curious to see what their data says and have they been able to write a ticket. I think that will be quite telling.
Well, I think the other thing too that the board needs to consider is this. Personal angler responsibility. If you make a law that is just a non-starter, whether it can be enforced or not, it certainly can't be enforced because nobody polices enough. So if you get something that's so disdainful, and it just doesn't work in a current environment, do you start going to some conservation equivalency? Well, you were trying to reduce our catch by X. Instead of doing that, we'll go to single hooks or something, and lures only in single hooks. They really, something as drastic and global as no targeting, it just, I don't know how it would work. It just would not, I would not feel guilty targeting, saying I was mackerel fishing, if we had a no targeting time. Now, on the other hand, I abide by all the other regulations. I would only feel guilty if I didn't. And if we want to go to single hook, yeah, it would bother me. It would drive me nuts, but I would certainly be happy to do that. So that's all you need. That's the problem. Besides being enforceable, it's got to sit in a person's conscience and feel conscientious about it.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, and I'll just know there's no no conservation equivalency while the stock is overfished.
That's true. Yeah, right. You're right.
Gotta think about that. Yeah, in the front here.
Yeah, I was, what Dom said, struck a chord. I'm a skier and everybody knows the code when they go skiing. Here is the code. And what if there was more education around the code of handling fish?
Yeah.
Proper release techniques, the education around the salinity and the water temperatures and just kind of a general, here are the rules to be an ethical fisherman.
Yeah, it's a great idea, something we talk about a lot. And I'm hoping now that we have some more resources on staff, like Corinne, we can start doing that more effectively. Yeah.
So next online, Matt Boutet. I could go French with that. Boutet. If you're on a computer, a space bar will unmute you. If you're on the app, you should be able to tap the screen and there it is.
I think I got it. Yep. I thought you were going to unmute me there, so I had already
No,
started.
I can mute people. I can't unmute people.
Oh boy. All right. Good to know. I live down in Biddeford, so I fish the Saco. I certainly don't discount the poor fish handling that we see up there and the high discard mortality. But at the same time, I do worry that the Saco has become a little bit of a whipping boy. And if we're going to be talking about closures over herring runs, which I think is a great idea, I think we should really be talking about rivers with herring runs rather than making closures that are Saco specific. I think there is a certain population that if you close the Saco down, they're going to move up to the Presumpscot, or they're going to move up to the Andro. These fish are going to get hammered elsewhere. So I think that is one thing that I think should be considered, is if we're going to be doing some sort of closure for the spring herring run, then it should not just be in the Saco. It should be coast-wide. The other kind of question, and I came in a little late, so this may have been addressed earlier. Originally, I think the Kennebec regs were because of a spawning population in the Kennebec, or a nascent spawning population. If that hadn't been discussed yet this evening, I'd love to hear any news about that. It seems like that has been very quiet for the last 10 or 15 years. The other thing, I think I heard Megan say that there were some states that want a higher probability of rebuilding before 2029 or by 2029. 50% certainly seems like an awfully low goal to me. So I would love to see Maine DMR pushing for more conservative measures. I don't want, whether or not we have a striped bass population in 2030, to be a coin toss. That just seems silly to me. And the last thing I had was the herring population on the Saco. The fish elevator there on the Saco channel has been broken for years, and it's under construction now. It's definitely not going to be done for this year's herring run. It just seems like that has been a problematic spot since they built it, and they've tried a few things, but it seems like it's always been carrot and never stick. And I feel like there needs to be some push from somewhere. I don't know if DMR can do anything there, or if that's all FERC. But it really is disgusting how long that has taken and how bad the herring have fared because of that. I think a lot of the problems we're seeing there are because the fish aren't able to make it upriver, so they just stack up below that dam, and the stripers hammer them and the fishermen hammer the stripers. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks, and I appreciate the feedback on the percent probability of rebuilding. I think maybe your one question was about the Kennebec spawning population. I think folks were saying that the juvenile abundance indices have been quite low over the last year, so I'm getting a nod from the back, so that's good. And I will be sure to include that in a future meeting presentation, because I'm hearing a lot of interest in that. So we'll be sure to include that. All right, we'll go here.
I just I'm Monday. I own a tackle truck. I've been doing this for 30 years. And every year it comes down to the herring. And one of the things, this is kind of a backwards question to you guys, because we kind of see a problem that exists every year that never gets taken care of. How many people actually get in trouble for using our lives on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? Because I feel like we are a pretty good closure on using the river herring. Doesn't get checked by law enforcement. And I had talked to law enforcement about it, and they said it's not worth their time to do it. It's an old blue law, and they write tickets, and the DA just swipes them off the table, so no one ever gets in trouble. And now everybody knows no one cares about the live lining, the no herring closure on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You go to the Saco River on Friday afternoon, there's 30 people that are live lining outlets, and there's nobody there doing it. So we already have a closure in here that nobody actually enforces. All those stripers we saw floating on Saco River and the Presumpscot River now, on those days, when you go up there, people are live lining, those fish could have been saved by a lot of already places that doesn't get enforced.
I do not know how many summons or tickets get issued.
Just the people I talked to said they don't bother with it anymore. It's an old blue law that nobody cares about. So I don't want you to take it off the books, but if you're not going to enforce it, there's no point having it. But we already have a closure stuff. Even though it's meant to protect our lives, it protects stripers on those heavily fished weekend days. And I'd love to have an answer from DMR as to why we're not taking advantage of it, because we're not making new laws, why not enforce the old ones?
Yep.
It seems like a simple fix. You just take, and I'll pay $20 a year for a fishing license in case more DMR officers. I don't think most people in this room would. I'd love to see more enforcement there, especially this time of year. But I know they're busy, they have lobstermen they have to take care of too, but enforce that law, and you're gonna save a ton of fish every spring. Because it's gonna take 3 years to put any of the law in place. You've already got the law. Enforce it.
Okay, thank you.
Next online is Camden. If you would like to unmute yourself, there you go.
Hi, yeah. Yeah, I'm from Mid-Coast, Maine, but I live right like 2 minutes from the Saco River. So I go down there quite a bit just to see what's going on this time of year. And I just wanted to make a comment on that, kind of echo some of the previous points is I don't necessarily think completely closing everything down is going to be a great solution just because, like somebody else said, those people are going to go somewhere else. Those fish are going to get pressured other places unless we're going to do a coast-wide ban. But I do think, the presence of somebody that's going to be paying attention, at least, just spending 5-10 minutes down there, you see something borderline illegal happening, in my experience. And so I think it would, one, just having an officer down there, occasionally even would cut down on the amount of, bad things happening. But also, again, like, limiting the hooks and, single hook regulations would I think would also cut down a lot. It's a lot of it seems to be because of, live lining fish. I've been down there at night and I've seen just like 5 or 6, 7 dead fish washed up on the shore, big oversized fish. So yeah, I just want Maine to continue to be one of the more conservative minded states and push for more conservation because we ultimately will pay the price before anybody else. We don't have another fishery, so I think that's important.
Great, thank you. We'll go back to the room. Yeah.
In the slides earlier, you mentioned that there was some consideration of a scoping session. A week or so ago, we went to a scoping session put on by FERC for the dam here in Brunswick, between Brunswick and Thompson, which is up for relicensing. And I felt very good about going to that as a fisherman because the dam has adverse impacts on shad and a whole bunch of other fish that are trying to get up there and can't because the fishery doesn't work very well. So I would encourage your group to hold some scoping sessions to allow the fishermen to have their say. And I applaud you for having this deal here tonight.
Thanks.
Okay, next online is Mike F. Walkingham?
You got it, yeah. Well done.
Thank you.
I also would like to thank you very much for holding this this session. I realize you don't have to do it, and it is much appreciated. I think aside from all of the other things we've discussed, and it's been mentioned a couple of times prior, one of the things that I would love to see focused on, and I understand everything that we want to do that we want to see done costs money. But one of the things that I would love to see is an all-out assault on angler education, to include proper fish handling posters at all access points. Maybe even there are a million ideas, but I am a charter captain. I do shark charters. You can't get a license to shark fish without watching a video put out by, I assume, one of the federal agencies. Sharks are, by all accounts, darn near at epic levels population-wise, and yet I have to watch a video in order to get a permit to fish for sharks. Tarpon, a fish there's really no reason to keep, can't be taken out of the water over 40 inches in Florida. There's a number of, I think, in addition to the unfortunate drastic measures we may have to take, I think there's a number of things that we could do before those measures are taken that could improve release mortality numbers significantly. I watch online discussion boards with, I'm obsessed with online discussion boards, and it's incredible to me the number of people who will defend poor fish handling techniques and say, well, stripers are tough and stripers are this and stripers are that. You can throw them back in the water. You can hold them out of the water for 15 minutes for photographs. I think it would be really, really effective to have a really passionate approach, and that could be a public-private partnership, as far as I'm concerned, between DMR and Stripers Forever or the ASGA or any number of organizations where we could put our heads together and really grind on this issue of proper fish handling, not removing the fish from the water, take your pictures with the fish in the water, etc. I think there are a lot of things we could consider to help release mortality and the general public's approach to fish, whether they keep them or not. And that's my 2 cents on the issue. And I just want to thank you so much for having this session.
Thank you so much. We'll go in the room, yeah, all the way in the back.
My name is Tim Adams. I've got 2 comments. One is just like to express my support for implementing the Kennebec River special regulations coast-wide for that early season. I think that the fact that there's precedent there, it's already in place, it's something that could be attainable, could protect some of the most important fish when they're most concentrated and most vulnerable. And the other one was about the education, which I totally agree with. And there's something that is already underway, which is from Keep Fish Wet. And there are these signs, and they're starting to pop up at some of the spots, but there's tons of these signs that can still go up. So if anybody's got a relationship with their municipality or harbor master or whatever, just hit up Keep Fish Wet and get those signs up.
Awesome, thank you. Before we go to the next webinar, I just want to let folks know it's 7:55. They gave me a key to the library, so we will keep going until everyone has said their comments. But in case anyone has anything in the main building, that access will close at 8. We have our own little exit here on the side, so you'll be able to get out, no problem. But if you need something in the main library, you got 5 minutes. All right.
Okay, next online is Jermaine C.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Alrighty. Thank you for holding this. This has been great listening in. I just wanted to kind of echo the Kennebec regulations would be great coast-wide for all the early season spring mortality that's currently happening. Also, I had a question about umbrella rigs. Are those fully legal in the state of Maine? Is there a limit to number of hooks that can be on those? Because I think that could be something to look into for gear restrictions as well. Dragging 4 or 5 striped bass behind a boat and then trying to unhook them all in a reasonable amount of time seems like it could not be great for the fish. But that's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, we'll note that. All right, in the room here, that's it, all right, yeah.
I think somebody mentioned it earlier, but regarding enforcement and funding enforcement, I think the whole thing that Dana mentioned a little bit about, there's no DMR enforcement, there's no IFMW enforcement. Would having a saltwater license be able to fund something like that? I mean, we talk a lot about educating people, but unfortunately, a lot of people learn better. It's just, the rules can't be enforced. Majority of people are not. I mean, I think we're assuming a lot that people are going to do the right thing without enforcement. The rules don't really matter.
Yeah.
I think it's prevalent in Saco, Brunswick, I mean, everywhere. Right. See it on the Kennebec too.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that and I'm looking to our legislator person in the back. I'm pretty sure it's in law, the saltwater registry, and that it's like only the $2 online fee or whatever it is. So that might be a law change to create, it would certainly be a law change to create a recreational saltwater license that's separate from that and that has a charge. And then the second part of that is collecting that money, where does it go? So what does the law prescribe as like the pot of money or the pot that money goes into, right? Because that would be the other part we'd have to figure out.
At the state level, so for white-tailed deer, they have a doe tag. And that money is allocated, I think, for winter traps. So it'd be the same idea, you know, you fund it. But I don't know who at the state level would basically make that determination that if we raise that saltwater fee to $25, but that money allocated towards funding DMR for enforcement. You know, you have one based in the Portland, Saco area, one up here in the Mid-Coast.
Yeah, so there's a
presence.
Yeah, so any
happens involved.
Any law or bill change that is marine related goes through the Marine Resources Committee at the legislature. So that would be the body that would be first receiving a proposed bill or proposed law. So they're the first pass at approving that.
Because I mean, I would imagine you could also fund research and conservation through that license, and you know, if people want to kill striped bass, that's fine, but you buy a tag to do that.
Yeah, and what you're proposing, it's not necessarily a foreign concept, right? We have a lobster license and we have a lobster management fund that is supported through that lobster license, right? Or lobster research. So it's not it's not a foreign concept that you're proposing. It is a process to go down that road, I guess that's my point.
Nobody likes licenses. It seems like it's a pretty important situation right now.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely.
May change happen in the past.
Yeah, I understand. I'll definitely note that to Commissioner Keller and Deidre Gilbert, who does all of our work with the Marine Resources Committee at the legislature. I'll let her know that this idea came up.
Okay, next person online is Chad Bean. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yes. I think the state should relook at the slot. The slot size. I mean, I've been catching, and Ian Sawyer and myself, we still keep big fish, 40-inch fish every year. It's not a problem. The state needs to relook at the size restrictions there. I think that's a misconception. That's part of this issue, I think.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, so I'll first touch on my name's Matt Victor. I live in Bath. I'm fortunate enough that I work in the tackle industry. I'm a charter boat captain and I fish a lot. My concern is that there are far too many fish in the slot this year. That 2015 class, 40+% of the 300 or 400 fish that I've caught since May 15th are in the slot this year. And then I will say, as someone who fishes the Kennebec a lot, the regulations are great if they are enforced. There's a complete lack of enforcement. To the point of your marine patrol officers are great, but they are commercial enforcers. They don't, I average 60 to 80 times in my boat on the Kennebec. I've been reported one time in 5 years. And they didn't even look at my tackle or what was in the cooler. They wanted to see fire extinguisher, life jacket, global safety. I grew up fishing the Androscoggin, grew up in Topsail, and there is plenty of bad behavior there as well. A lot of it comes from a lack of education, and it's frankly time for a $25 or $30 fishing license that allows DMR to capture license information, email to be able to not have IFW tell people about this meeting in a broader way. I think that's probably kind of a spot where DMR should look at what IFW has done for public outreach, and that's your model right there.
Okay, thank you.
Next online is Ryan Dobbins. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
I would just like to say a lot of guys are talking about the Kennebec laws throughout the state of Maine. And I think it's a great idea. Kennebec, so I deal with it. But I'd like to just go ahead and say that I think the major issue is the lack of law enforcement in general. So, I mean, when I fish the Kennebec, if I fish it, 20 days in a year, I never see a warden unless I'm the one calling to have him come down, which I think in itself is pathetic. But then after talking to the wardens, as someone else mentioned with the DA, it's not the law enforcement's issue that the cases are getting dropped. That comes down to the DA. So I was wondering who or what could we all talk to kind of, smarten them up. This is not a joke. It shouldn't be taken as a joke because, like someone said, if everyone's getting these tickets and it's getting dropped, what's going to stop them? It's a slap on the wrist. That's part one. And part two, the other thing was, is there something we can do this year? I don't fish the Saco at all, especially after seeing everything that's going on down there. Is there a way we can close that other side? Because I don't know what went into the thought process on just closing one side. I mean, it's kind of simple science that everyone's just going to jump to the other side. And that's what happened. And there's Facebook posts now of people throwing the fish off the cliffs and all this stuff. So if you get these guys off of the shore, I mean, I think it's going to save a lot of fish. So I guess those are my two questions. And I'm just wondering what we can do.
Yeah, so for the patrol question, I'm going to have to ask patrol about, why some of the violations that maybe they're issuing are getting dropped or things like that. So I don't have an answer for you on that today, but I've noted it. If we were going to change something this year, it would have to be through emergency regulation. So obviously we've done that before. I'll just say, I think my personal preference would be to go through regular rulemaking because I really value public comment. And I think I've heard a lot of different ideas. I've heard consensus that there's an issue and some different ideas of how to address it. So I'd want to get public comment, but that is just my personal opinion. I work for a broader agency, so I'll definitely note to Commissioner Kelleher that you suggested that. Okay, any other hands in here? Hey!
Through public comment.
Hey, we have patrol.
So I just want to address a couple things. Yellow line closure, not fully enforced. I don't know where the area that is a blue bar came from. We wrote, I think 30 warnings last weekend. So there is a educational approach to that. That Saco River draws a lot of people with lower skill set or a lower experience, let's say. So we take an approach where if you have no idea what you're doing and you showed up to fish the Saco River, we're not going to write you a ticket for an LY alert and educate you. Obviously, if things become repeatable, like things we deal with, yes, unfortunately, it's going to take a different approach.
You do the same, someone's fishing lobster traps without a rec license?
And I mean, law is, especially marine resource law, is every part of gray. We take all the information we can, we look at it, we look at the person's knowledge, we look at intent, we make a decision. So, if a sailboat drops anchor and they have a lobster trap off the back, or let's say a folding crab trap, like that absolutely could be an educational piece, and I don't think anybody in this room wants us to become an agency that's black and white, fully on enforcement. We've done really well with public support because we have a very much a community policing approach to a lot of these things. So that is enforced. It's a little trickier. You know, you can possess an unalive river herring, you just can't take. So there are people that save them to fish them. And that's fine. So that's the burden of proof we have to overcome when we are enforcing that area. As far as enforcement and money, we have a fund that we pay a lot of officers a lot of money to do dedicated striped bass enforcement. Hotspots are the Saco River, the Androscoggin. Obviously, we focus on the weekends because of higher activity, especially if it's a nice weekend. So that's why we hit it, all those places really hard this weekend. And like I said, the total violations, including some this morning, were in the 40 range, which is pretty good. And that's, you know, something that's repeated for most of the summer while, you know, and especially in the spring, the fishing activity is very high in the Saco River. As far as enforcement other places, Kennebec River, there's a lot of guides. We don't check guides as frequently as we check non-guides. Our expectation is because you become a guide that you're going to be a steward to conservation. Everybody wants to see us. You know, they want to talk about seeing us when we're in a venue like this. That attitude quickly change is when you're boarded while on a chart. We check your tackle and we do all that. Do we do that? Yes. But we try to limit the inconvenience, let's say, you know, on a commercial operation. So I can't remember all the criticism I received. Hopefully we kind of touched on some of the simpler responses. Got anything on standard? I guess.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I didn't see you were there. All right, I can't remember if we're webinar.
Let's go online.
Okay.
We have one more
We
online.
got one more online and then I'll go to you. So I see two more hands and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, Captain Ian Sawyer.
Hi, I wasn't really paying attention, but I believe somebody said that I keep 40-inch fish all year a couple comments ago. Did I hear that correct?
Yeah, that's third Ian.
Yeah, I think they did.
Yeah, he said that.
Yeah, apparently some of the Saco River troll people that hate me have infiltrated this meeting. So anyway, I don't. First of all, I hate potato striper. I don't eat them at all, and I don't understand why people do if the U.S. Department of Agriculture says that you shouldn't consume them more than one a week. I don't even know why they allow you to keep one a day, but anyway, that's just my 2 cents. And I definitely don't keep fish, so I just wanted to clear that up. Thanks.
Yep. All right, I had two hands in the room. Let's go. Oh, over here.
My name's Lou. I guide on the Saco myself, probably 75 to 85 trips a summer. I'd like to, whatever Matt said, he was spot on. The Saco has become a whipping boy for social media backlash. It's that area of the dam is such a small and congested area that's accessible to a lot of people in a very easy way. So you can get up there by boat, that's super easy to navigate. You can get there by literally driving on the road and taking 10 steps and you're fishing. So as far as like, when it comes to shutting down areas, I want to caution people to be really careful because we've already shut down one side and it didn't really work. It's that people move and they're going to keep moving. But what's next? Are we going to shut down the Zump? Are we going to shut down the Royal River because we don't like what's happening up there? I worry about that. I worry about the special Kennebec regs. Personally, I don't fish bait with my clients, but I know that the tackle shops are a dying industry and the bait that they sell is the biggest thing that they sell. That's what they make their money on all year long. If we start cutting Dana's feet out from under him, Pete, the guy down at Waterboro, you're not going to see anything, and it's going to ruin the whole fishery in the state of Maine. And then I would really like to see if Representative Hepler could help with Kelleher. I got to take part in the Guiding for the Future program last year that was put on by DMR. And we stayed with Marine Patrol guys, and these guys they're spread thin. I think there's maybe like 3 to 5 from Bath, the Kittery. That's not. So if we can get some more funding for them, and I worked in public safety too. It's a thankless job. It's hard to recruit, but whatever we can do, if we can get these guys overtime, during the month of May and June, that goes to their retirement and bump those numbers up, and they can just sit on the Saco, one in the boat, one from shore, just to be seen, to educate, and if they have to write a ticket, they write the ticket. But that's where it's going right now. I just think we're looking at like 7 to 10 social media posts that gain a lot of traction. And yeah, there's a ton of dead fish. It is what it is. It's a blood sport. I don't like it, but shutting things down is not going to be the right way to go.
Thank you. All right,
And
wait,
did appear
one more.
online.
I think you're all good. Okay, so you got his spot.
I just wanna, I agree with everything that's been said about the rivers, and Lou's comment actually brings up a very good point about the bait shops and selling bait and stuff like that. I'm curious of your perspective of like shutting down just the herring, and I'm curious if you've talked to Massachusetts about their kind of, how that has worked out for them, because that's a thing there.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Massachusetts yet. I did get some emails about it over the weekend. My understanding is they did that for river herring conservation, not striped bass discard mortality reasons.
Okay.
One more hand did pop up online.
Okay.
Okay, last online
Back
hand.
to, and then we're really calling it, guys.
Dom, you're the last online hand.
One year, recently, I sat down and looked at all the states talking about consumption of striped bass, and only one state has no restrictions. Guess what state that is?
I can guess.
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. They have no restrictions and they love the big fish. So, it is very interesting. So anyway, that's just a comment. So thank you all for this meeting. It's been great.
Thanks,
I would say that's probably because of sampling, not because.
All right, we got one more. Yeah.
Great. First of all, again, thank you because it's been really helpful. I guess my comment is a question to you. You've got a room full of experienced and committed fishermen. What can we do to make your job easier, to make some of these changes happen that we've been discussing happen more quickly? I personally see that the only thing we can do relatively quickly is the education segment.
Yeah.
And I think it might make sense to maybe recruit some of the more experienced people here to participate in a broader public education program.
Yeah, I think we're thinking similar things. So the first thing that helps is everyone showing up tonight, right? Sometimes it can actually be hard to get feedback. So this has been really helpful. I would agree. It sounds like education is definitely needed and with a hotspot on the Saco River. So having some conversations with the rec program about what we could do there, but I think also engaging with, I'll say leaders in the industry, however you want to identify or call those people to start there and see what we can do this year. And then I think we've heard a lot about different ideas on how to approach discard mortality in the state and thinking about what, if any, rulemaking we should consider for 2025. So that's how I see it. Yeah. Okay.
I know it was the last one.
Yeah.
Going back to the education part, because closure and all those kind of measurements are kind of a harsh approach. And for my experience, I got captain and I participated on the Guiding for the Future the impact, because we as guides, we meet people there, and most people have good intentions. It's like they put in the fish back after 50 minutes of walking around, but they still want to put it back. But they just need to know, understand what's happening, right? So I think back to the education, and I was blown away by that last year Guide for the Future thing, all things that I learned how to communicate better to my clients, to my friends, everybody that I see out there and interact with. So that's I took that with me, and it's super valuable. So I am a steward and I'm better. For that little bit of whatever effort, whoever put that together, that was great. And if more of us would have been there, you know, the more it goes out. So, who do you educate to put the word out?
Yeah, thank you. I've heard really great things about the Guiding for Future. I think, Peter, were you spearheading that? So you can thank Peter for doing that.
Well, there were a lot of.
There were a lot of people, but Peter was one of them.
Dr. Daniel Chuck at Keep Fish Wet.
Okay.
And a bunch of folks like Lars here, sitting in the second row from DMR. We had a lot. It was a big group effort. And hopefully we can find money to do it again next spring.
Awesome. Great. Okay, I think that's gonna wrap it up for us tonight. I just want to say a huge thanks for everyone who came. I know some folks that left. I think we had over 60 people on the webinar and 50 plus, I'm not good at counting people, 50 plus people in here. The last time I had over 100 people at a meeting, and this isn't even like a public hearing, was Menhaden commercial allocation. So I just want to say thanks. Like that's really great to see so many people engaged, and I think it gives us enthusiasm to work on this as well.
Yeah.
So thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Get home safe.
Thank you.